I'll hopefully get to as many of those questions as possible towards the end of the session, as well as those that have already been submitted on registration. And then the third thing to say is this session is being recorded and will be uploaded to the Digital Culture Network YouTube channel very soon. And if you didn't know about the Digital Culture Network, it supports digital skills development in arts and culture, and it's made up of 9 tech champions, each with their own digital specialisms, based in one of our 9 arts councils offices. And we support organizations through kind of one-to-one mentorship, training and resources. And I think it's worth saying that since the Digital Culture Network formed over about 1.5 years ago now, we've developed an amazing partnership with Google Arts and Culture, and we've hosted a number of kind of in-person digital skills training days. And very recently, that team, Google Arts and Culture, have published an excellent kind of resource and toolkit called Connected to Culture, which Moira from the team will talk through towards the end of the session. But they've also partnered with us on this series of webinar, also called Connected to Culture. And I think I probably don't need to say it, and it is an enormous understatement, but obviously the impact of coronavirus has been profound. But kind of the use of new technology and digital technology has, for many organizations, helped and provided a way to kind of either rethink creative content and business models. And that is what this session is really about. It's about kind of understanding how these business models have developed or evolved over the last 6 months. And I think what we're going to cover today, are some practical insights and tips, I think, that will be applicable to all levels and for organizations of all sizes. But I should say, and if you've been at one of these Connected to Culture sessions before, I also feel kind of duty bound to say, this is not an entirely practical session. This is not a webinar that will spell out the steps to take you from A to B to set up kind of some sort of commercial revenue generating channel. This is far more about hearing from kind of people in arts and culture who've gone through these changes and experienced them, and hearing about their stories and the journey they've taken to get to here, and particularly how that's changed over the last 6 months. And on that, our amazing panel this time includes Anku Bahl. He's the Director of Content and Audiences at Sadler as well in London, a dance theatre with centuries of theatrical history and whose mission is to make and share dance that inspires. So I'm going to do it again. Anku, you're there. Can you say hello quickly?
Hi, everybody. Nice to see you.
Thank you, Anku. We've also got Liam Darbon. Liam is the head of Omichannel trading at Tate, a family of 4 art galleries spanning the country and over 500 years of art. Liam, are you there?
Hi, Owen. Nice to see you. Nice to see everybody.
Nice to see you too. And finally, we've got Chloe Hayward-Grant, Head of Digital Experience at Royal Botanic Gardens Kew, world leading conservation and UNESCO World Heritage Site. Chloe, are you there?
Hi, everyone. Really nice to meet you all.
Hi, Chloe. Hi, all. And thank you for joining us. So let's get straight into the questions because we haven't got a huge amount of time. There's plenty to cover. So, Liam, I thought I'd come to you first. And I think this is more of a general question before we get into the specifics, because I'm particularly interested in your background and the fact that you've come from John Lewis and the retail sector. So I'm kind of immediately kind of interested to find out what your observations were coming into arts and culture. How is this sector different, or how does it take a different approach to revenue generation versus retail? And did anything stick out for you?
Yeah. Okay. So look, first of all, really nice to meet everybody. I hope you're all well. I think coming from purely commercial background into the arts and culture sector was a shock to the system for me. Talking money and talking profitability and talking, data was hard to a certain extent, and wasn't necessarily something that motivated the organization in the same way that it motivated the previous organizations that I'd worked for. And I was used to confidently talking about income, about profitability, about how we use data to inform all of the decisions that we're making, and success was about the commercials. And whilst John Lewis and Waitrose, the business was built on on the formation of a partnership, and the people sit at the heart of that. Ultimately, it was there as a retailer. So then coming into Tate and also working as a non-exec for Birmingham Museums Trust was just fascinating, and I had to adapt the narrative to talk to the mission and vision of that organisation more, and begin to create meaningful links between the revenue that we were looking to generate and what that would deliver as an impact to the audiences we were serving. So I think all of the commercial strategies that we've pulled together have always been in response to what we're going to do to give more people more access and more enjoyment and more understanding of art as in response to Tate's overall mission. And for me, then I began to think about, actually the biggest challenge is, how do you marry these two? How do you marry being data led, taking insights in order to be commercially successful, and marry that with an incredible mission and opportunity to expose people to art? And actually the irony of that is I spent many a year in John Lewis and Waitrose thinking to myself, how do we increase dwell time? How do we create retail theatre experiences? How do we bring to life the shops? How do we bring to life our digital assets? And actually we've got the opposite. We've got the most incredible spaces that we work in, and we've got the luxury of being a part of. And actually then it's about, how do you layer on to that by giving the opportunity to spend with us, or join us as a member, or donate, or eat in one of our eateries. And I think then it's about developing that end-to-end proposition to make sure that actually the visit is supplemented with those commercial revenue streams. So yeah, it was a fascinating transition, and for me it's been a real pleasure to look at how I marry the two experiences to provide the best outcome for Tate.
And Liam, it sort of goes without saying, and it's an obvious thing to say, really, is that Tate have a very well established e-commerce presence. But I was wondering kind of what the trends, challenges, or opportunities that you noticed kind of regarding revenue generation over the last 6 months. What's changed, and what's happened, and what are you adapting to?
I mean, what hasn't changed? Probably where to start. So I mean, it's forced everybody to think digital first, whether that's our audiences or whether that are our colleagues within the businesses as well. And I think when we directly relate it to e-commerce, what are we seeing? So we're seeing a more local audience because our international reach has decreased. Yet the irony behind that is actually on our content-led site, our international figures are through the roof because more people can access us now. And actually we're giving them richer, deeper, more meaningful content via that channel. We've got greater dwell time on the site, and we are, as sure with everybody else, seeing the device shift backwards. So actually we've got increased desktop uses, we've got increased tablet usage, and all of those were in decline, and mobile was the king. And so actually we've had to slightly shift from being mobile first and begin to talk to a desktop and tablet based audience again. We're seeing more transactions on our site because actually our free entry is now ticketed, but we've got a ton less income. And so how do you marry actually the website being busier, but it being less productive in the sense of profitability? And I think what we've seen from a trend perspective is that visitors are wanting, as I said before, that end-to-end experience. And I'll probably talk about that a lot during this, partly because my title is head of Omichannel and it's my job to think about the overall experience. But I genuinely think what visitors are looking for is to take the opportunity of a real life experience of coming to one of our spaces if they can, and then bolt on all of the other experiences you have to offer, whether that's through retail or donating or becoming a member or eating something or subscribing to something or grabbing content in the kind of post-purchase journey or post-visit journey. What we're seeing in the kind of retail e-commerce side of the business is people are wanting to treat themselves more. They're wanting the pick me up of experiencing a lockdown and going, actually, I just want to give myself a little something. And that is also translating into kind of treating your home. So home product and office-based product has been growing phenomenally. So things like custom prints or art or graphics for the wall, but also office product has been increasing as well. And I think lastly, when we think about trying to enable that visit to our sites, the most important thing that we try to do is engender that sense of trust and reassurance that it's a safe, considered visit to our site. So actually we try to help you understand what your journey might look like to our site from your home, what train stations you might be going to. Actually, is there a local London bike stop that you can pick up a bike and cycle to us? Where would you lock your bike? How would you walk to us? And I think everybody is looking for more reassurance right now across that journey when they're visiting. So I think that would be some of the insights. I've got a ton of others that I can definitely share with everybody as well under kind of the headings of ticketing or membership or retail and stuff like that. So please do let me know if you want to hear more of them.
So on that, actually, and with it, we're obviously talking about a large organization with a large digital footprint. How significant are the opportunities for smaller organizations to get into e-commerce or revenue generating using digital channels?
Yep. So I would say if you're doing e-ticketing already, you're already doing e-commerce. So step one, you've got a channel there. I think the other thing as well is, if you've got social media presence, you've got an opportunity through that channel too. So if you are a smaller organization and you don't want the heavy lifting of an e-commerce operation, then I suppose the two biggest pieces of advice I would give you are utilize the ticketed purchase journey, because you've got an engaged audience there that wants to come and visit you, and therefore you've got an opportunity to introduce other aspects of the experience of your brand. And then I think secondly, think about your channel and your kind of omni-channel strategy overall. So how do the various channels that you talk to your audiences speak to each other and speak to those that want to purchase or interact with you? And I think by doing that and having a slightly more holistic view of that audience engagement strategy and how you potentially want to monetize that may relieve the pressure of just thinking that e-commerce is the only way to go. So you could be thinking about social shopping, you could be thinking about what you're doing with your contact centers, your CRM, email in general has, just to let you know, has been phenomenal for us. It has been our the most incredible channel for engagement and conversion. But once we reopen, there's the in-gallery experience, there's the ticketed experience, there's those experiences for your members and how you speak to those supporters as well. So I think look, this isn't going to go away, but there are ways that smaller organizations can tap into the kind of digital selling. But do think about actually, what will be the most successful for your individual organization, because it will depend on how the audiences want to interact with you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Liam. So Anku, I'm going to come to you next, and slightly different perspective on revenue generating here, because the Dancing at Dusk film was phenomenal, and and became in some ways a pilot or a project to test the monetizing of content. So firstly, can you tell us a little bit about the film and how it became a bit of a test bed for you and for Sadler's Wells?
For those of you who haven't seen it, you've got sort of the link for things, but I'm just going to drop the trailer into the chat. So when you want to look at it, have a look at the trailer. But basically, Sadler's Wells, we've been thinking about how do we monetize content for quite some time, and we've never done it. The only way we monetize content, as it were, is by selling tickets to our shows. Everything else we've done online, any other dance content, has always been free, normally through YouTube or through social media or through our website. And we knew we wanted to test it because coronavirus hit and 75% of our revenue is ticket sales, and it disappeared. And also because we didn't want us, like a lot of organizations at the beginning of the pandemic, gave away a lot of content for free, in some ways devaluing that content in and of itself. Artists make work and should be paid to make work, and there should be a monetary value attached to that work. And so we wanted to really think about, what does that mean in the digital space? And in some ways, we're not as far advanced as a lot of organizations, but this was us in March going, what do we do? And so we were about to launch a production of Pina Bausch's The Rite of Spring. It was going to go on tour around the world, 2 weeks, and it was in its last 2 weeks of rehearsal when lockdown hit. And so when all of these dancers were being sent off to their separate corners of the world, they decided to have one last rehearsal. And this is 38 dancers from 14 different African countries, the first ever all Black company performing Pina Bausch's The Rite of Spring. It's spectacular. And we were so sad that it wasn't going to have its legs as a tour. There was a documentary filmmaker on the ground who was capturing sort of making of footage. The company decided to have a rehearsal at sunset on the beach, and the documentary filmmaker captured it. So let's not pretend Sadler was really strategic and thought, oh great, let's do this thing from the outset. It's just, oh, pandemonium, pandemic hits, there's a film. A month later, we're in strategic meetings in our organization, and somebody's like, I think there's a film on the beach. It took us 4 weeks to get a hold of the film, see some of the footage, but the minute you see it, you go, oh wow, if there was ever a piece of content that we would want to monetize, this would be it. Like if we can't sell this, then we probably can't sell anything. And so we were like, we wanted to monetize something. This opportunity came along, and we went for it.
Great. And you know, what else kind of were you interested in exploring? Revenue generation, obviously, you know, but were there any other KPIs that you were keen to test? And you know, can you give us a sense of, you know, how that went? What did you find out? And you know, how might that inform the future?
I think it's really important to say our website didn't support us being able to sell and show that content within our website universe. So we also had to find a way to do that. So we decided to do it through Vimeo On Demand. But again, the reason to do it through Vimeo On Demand, not built that capability right now within our website, and all the rest was, like Owen saying, we wanted to test a number of things. So one, we wanted to sell the content and see what we could do. We did a 48-hour rental for a $5, and that was currency equivalent globally. But there were a lot of other things that were, in fact, more important to us than the money that we would make on this. Going back to sort of Liam's point about being mission-driven. So the first was about patron membership and retention. Patron and membership retention and loyalty. So we wanted to be able to charge for this content, but give that content as a perk to our members and patrons and thank them for being with us. But also it's a much better perk for somebody if it has perceived monetary value. The next was audience development. We wanted to be able to give it for free to specific schools or specific segments that we're trying to woo to come into the theater or to be involved with dance. And we were able to do that. The third was about fundraising. We were very curious about whether specific discrete digital projects, we could start fundraising against them as opposed to fundraising for Sadler's Wells writ large. We wanted to test and learn from paid models. We wanted to serve audiences in our community with inspiring content in a difficult time. And that's sort of been true of everything we've done online, wanting to continue to stand by our mission to make and share dance that inspires us all. But this was one way to do that. And the last was to increase the profile and support for the production itself. So when it goes back on the road, when all of this ends and we can tour the work, we wanted it to have a higher profile. So more people around the world would be likely to see it when it did go live. And I think one of the key things for us is, we as an organization don't believe digital content cannibalizes live sales. But what we really wanted to go is actually this specific piece of content is something you'll never get in the theater. You're never going to see these dancers performing this thing on the beach at sunset in Senegal at this time. And that's special. And actually is totally different to the experience of that in the theater. So we tested all of those things. And in some ways, we learned along the way.
So on those learnings, you know, what might you take forward, and what were the things that really came to light or surprised you across those 6 or 7 KPIs that you mentioned?
So patron and membership retention was super high, lots of engagement. Audience development, we were able to offer it to a lot of discrete constituencies that had never engaged with Sadler's Wells for free, and that content just took off. People watched it, they loved it. We had we have a group called Artistry Youth Dance that we work with, based in London. Young dancers who were saying it's the first time they'd seen Black dancers dancing this work, and it really inspired them. And that kind of stuff was really meaningful. It covered its costs, which is huge for us. You know, all of the incremental costs of making this happen, we were able to cover those costs, not the cost of the production and all the rest, but that was really important. We weren't so successful at fundraising against it. I think we didn't have enough lead times to go, you funder, do you want to fundraise this thing? And in general, our fundraisers want to get behind the vision of Sadler's Wells as opposed to discrete projects. So we probably wouldn't do that again. I think on the learning side, and really, really tactically, if you're going with Vimeo on demand, just at the top, go 30% of revenue is lost on taxes, fees, the model, all the rest. Just build that into your revenue assumptions. Of gross sales, it was about 27% for us, with currency calculations, bank fees, all the rest. We don't think this is going to be a money spinner, right? Like, we're not thinking that, okay, digital sales of content are going to replace what we've lost in our theaters. But we do think there are halo effects on fundraising, on membership, on brand, on events that are meaningful enough for us to continue to invest in this type of work going forward. And two other really quick things. Audience communication and user journey planning is critical. And if you think from an omni-channel perspective, as Liam's just talked about, from the moment you tell somebody about that show to how they get to that show, even if they just can't figure out how their Wi-Fi works, they expect you to solve that problem, right? So like, I can't tell you how many people were on the phone with like, check your Wi-Fi, right? And that's fair enough, right? And I think so thinking about audience journey is really critical. And the other thing is, if you're thinking about monetizing content, be really clear that monetizing might be one of the objectives, but know exactly what else you're trying to achieve. There might be a revenue goal, but what else are you trying to do, and how do you do that through the model?
Excellent advice. Thank you, Anku. So Chloe, let's come to you next. And you're actually in quite a unique position in that you've worked at Q for quite some time. Took a short break for a while, and then you returned, and the world has completely changed. So, you know, with that sort of unique perspective, you know, how would you describe how the leadership's attitude at Q to revenue generation or digital has shifted?
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Owen. So, and hi everyone. So I took a career break from the end of October last year, and I came back to Q about 2 months ago. So I missed all the drama, missed all the excitement of this year. But it's been really amazing coming back, because a lot of the conversations that we've been desperate to have with our senior leadership around digital revenues and around how we prioritize some of those journeys that Liam was talking about were finally on the table. A problem that we had, and I think it's quite a common problem in the sector, is that we have lots of different revenue journeys on the site. So we have tickets to sell, we have memberships to sell, we have things to sell in the shop, we want people to donate to us. And a lot of those teams responsible for those want those asks to be front and center on our website, front and center on our social channels. And we've always struggled to have the strategic conversation about actually how do we help people go on those journeys? How do we warm people up and then take them on a journey with us as an organization? And I think what's been really fantastic this year is that our senior leadership have finally started to understand that just as we wouldn't, when somebody turned up at the gardens, ask them immediately to buy a ticket, donate, join, buy from the shop, we won't want to do that online as well. So it's been really fantastic that we've actually been able to bring them back to the data. So we've been spending a lot of time looking at our analytics and using tools like Google Optimize to test some of our messaging across the site. So we're now much clearer that actually our biggest ask when people land on our homepage is to buy a ticket, but then from there we want to take them on lots of other different journeys as well. So that's been fantastic and really freeing for the team, because it's allowed us to, I suppose, demonstrate that actually we can optimize our conversions and we can really make more money for Q while still meeting some of those other revenue asks later in the journey. And we've had real successes, and then being able to shift some of those asks onto our social channels as well. So for example, we did a cold membership ask on the back of a Facebook post, which we'd never done before, but it really drove membership sales more than any of us were expecting for the organization. We weren't expecting it to do so well, but it's been fantastic to have the senior buy-in to try some of that stuff as well, to experiment a bit more. So it's been really refreshing coming back into Q and being able to have those conversations at quite a strategic level that we weren't doing before the pandemic.
And if that's on the leadership level, what about on a more practical level? You mentioned the different teams interacting with your different channels and platforms. you know, how have those ways of working changed between the team members or the different teams?
I mean, I think as I think many people in the sector found, a lot of our staff were furloughed, so it really forced people to focus on what their core goals were. Particularly over the summer, we were lucky that the gardens could remain open, but we had less staff, and we really had to be a bit more focused on how we were working. And I think that enabled us to work in a different way to how we'd worked before. And I also think working remotely has allowed us to, I suppose, break down those departmental barriers that I guess we sometimes have. We have 2 sites at Kew, so we have our Kew Gardens in London, and then we have Wakehurst, which is a botanic garden in Sussex. And then our buildings, we're all spread out in terms of when we'd normally in the office, are spread out in lots of different buildings, so often a 10-15 minute walk from some of our colleagues. And what's been brilliant about working remotely is that you're finding that project teams are working in a much more of a team-like way than they were previously, which has been really nice. And I suppose the other thing is that those teams are then iterating much quicker, so they're looking at the data. So for example, some of those things I was talking about that we were doing on social media around how we balance our asks, so how we balance, for example, our membership asks with some of our more mission-based content, actually being able to talk collectively in our teams about how we prioritize and come up with a plan with lots of different people from lots of different teams involved has really helped us. So it feels much more collaborative and much more data-driven than it did before. And I think also people are starting to see the value of some more of that rich content that we're creating as a digital team, and are helping us to create that more as well. So it feels like a really different organization to come back to. It's been really nice.
So again, then, similar question to you as the one that I asked Liam. You know, for organizations who are a lot smaller, or maybe just thinking about leveraging digital channels to generate money, you know, where do you start in an environment or a world that, you know, on first impressions, you know, looks very intimidating and vast?
It can be really overwhelming. I think there's so many different things you can do, and I think when you're starting out, like, there are so many different people telling you, oh, well, you need to use all these different channels. But actually, I mean, my advice would be just to keep it simple and just to see if you can experiment with like just one small thing. So for example, a couple of years ago, we just really focused on our ticket journey, and we looked at the copy. That was all that we could really change. We use a third-party ticketing provider, so all we really had control over was the words that we used to take people on that journey. And just through looking at those words and testing with friends and family, to be honest, we do more extensive user testing, but on this particular piece of work, we were just watching people that we knew go through that ticketing journey, and we managed to increase our conversion, so our number of our sort of percentage of people that went all the way through to the end of that journey by about 20%. And it was just through changing some of the wording. And likewise, I think if you can, even with your social posts, just you know, be a bit more focused about trying to test different copy, test different images. There's lots I think you can achieve with really doing very small changes. So I would say, you know, backing up what Liam was saying, really don't get overwhelmed by trying to do big e-commerce projects or big CRM projects. Just focus on small things and see what makes a difference.
Brilliant, Chloe, thank you very much. So let's turn to some of the questions that we've received already. And please, as a quick reminder, you know, use the chat function to get any questions that you'd like me to ask the panel. I'm more than happy to get to some of them, and I'll try and get to as many as possible before the end of the session. But the first one, really, we've kind of touched upon it, at least Anku has, and I'll go to him first. And this is from Fran Healy from the Stoller Hall and Catherine Johnson at the Arts Development Office. They are, and I'm paraphrasing, apologies to those guys, but they're interested in how much you can charge for digital events when so much other content is free. Can you monetize in a world where so much is given away? And if so, how?
So I would argue we can and should monetize when so much is given away for free. I think that's on a principles level, as an industry, we need to do that. And that's a personal battle of mine, but I think it's really important. But I do think you're right to go. There's a lot of free stuff, and some of it's great and some of it is not. But if you are going to think about trying to charge for something, it has to. Digital audiences are incredibly savvy, and you're competing in a completely different marketplace than you would in your live venues, right? So if you think about your live venue, you're competing with a restaurant or a cinema or another theater. Online, you're competing with Netflix. And so I think you have to think about what offerings you have and which are of a high enough quality that you would ask somebody to pay for or spend their time with. So I think that's the first point. And it has to be made for digital in order for you to charge for it. It can't, for us, we don't feel comfortable going, here's a live capture shot for the purposes of selling this to producers around the world, and therefore I'm going to charge a human being to watch this thing that I made for a totally different purpose. That I don't think you can charge for. But I do think you can charge for something that you went, I think this is how you should consume this, and this is how the artist thought you should consume this, and therefore you pay for that thing. On price point, it's a very complex question. We went with a $5 because it was simple, because it was less than Netflix, and because that's what the BFI was charging. Literally, that's the science that went into our like pricing decision on that. And we learned a lot about it. And also, we did that pricing globally on a currency conversion, right? Now, that was because we had to. Using the Vimeo model, you can't really set prices, but that's not equitable, right? A $5 in different parts of the world is not pricing parity. And so if we had all the technical capabilities in the world, we might make a different choice. But again, that would be my thinking on that.
Thank you, Anku. Chloe, what are your thoughts?
I think I would echo everything that Anku said. And I guess the other thing I would say is that I think, I don't know, I mean, similar to what's been said already, we haven't done any paid for live performances, but what we have done is use live content to retain our members and retain our patrons. So if there's things that you can do on a first go just to try and retain the audiences that you already have, then I think that's really helpful. I think in terms of looking at other ways that you can add content on, one way that we're trying to think about it right now, and this is something that's definitely in the works for us, is trying to think about what we can add on for people when they've already got their wallet out. So it's not thinking about selling somebody a separate digital content experience. It's about saying, actually, if you're already doing something with us, maybe that's buying a membership, maybe that's buying a ticket to the gardens, maybe that's buying something in the shop. Is there a package of digital content that we can add on to that sale? Because you're talking to a warm audience then. You're not having to go cold and sell a product on its own. It becomes enhancing their existing experience rather than a totally separate offer.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chloe. Thank you, Anku. So, Liam, I've got a question for you now. And in all of our Connected to Culture sessions so far, it's been really important for us to acknowledge that using digital and new technology isn't a cure-all to engage with audiences in a way that we might have done pre-lockdown. And that a significant proportion of the population, have significant problems and either accessing devices or getting online. So the question really, kind of in this context and with that in mind, I wondered whether what the broad accessibility considerations were with e-commerce.
Cool. So look, I think accessibility of e-commerce is challenging because it's e-commerce, and so you're always going to be limited by the need for access to some sort of device. But I think ultimately, when we think about reflecting on the kind of pivot towards e-commerce and that supporting the business, ultimately we still need to respond to our mission, and our mission of the understanding and enjoyment of art for everybody can't be removed by a pandemic. And so I would go back to and again repeat kind of what Anku and Chloe have also said around. Think about your channels as a whole. Yes, we can focus in on digital, but actually you've still got that in-gallery experience. You've still got, you can still post stuff to us. You can still fax us if you want to. You can even call us. And so I think it's about using every single channel to ensure that you are providing access to absolutely everybody. There's obviously the functional stuff you need to do on the site. So, if you are a public company, then you obviously need to make sure that you are WCAG 2.1 compliant and things like that. But ultimately, I think it's really hard to think about how the e-commerce becomes equitable. But I think when you look at it more broadly in the sense of the content that we want to provide, most people still want the in real life experience. Exactly what Anku was saying. People want to come and see or experience things in real life. And actually, I think when we think about accessibility, there's a marrying up I think we need to do of making sure we are being completely accessible or as accessible as we can be in a digital space, but also recognize that for those people who may never have been able to visit us previously, we're now serving them with richer, more meaningful content through our channels, and actually internationally we're serving those audiences better as well. And so I think, you know, I think we try and weigh it up to make sure that we are being as fair as possible with the audiences that we're serving, and give as much access as possible as well, in a time where actually kind of you know, programs where you would want to reach directly into a community could be really challenging.
Thanks, Liam. And Anku, you know, what are those type of considerations, accessibility considerations, digital exclusion considerations, when we're talking about the potential to monetize content? I think you're on mute.
There you go. I think, so you're right, digital poverty and people not being able to access the content is one part of the equation, and quite frankly, we aren't equipped to be able to solve that. But for the folks who do have the ability to tune in, we've made a commitment to subtitle all content, either burned on or through closed captions. That's everything that goes out from us, and I think that's incredibly important. A lot of this, the longer form content that we're sharing, we're also audio describing all of that. And I think a lot of organizations have a question about the cost benefit analysis of doing audio description. I would highly recommend it. You know, for example, for Dancing at Dusk, it was our first attempt to audio describe our digital content. We worked with a fantastic audio describer, Caroline Byrne, and the numbers on who accessed that were astounding, to the point where we were spending about £2 per person who watched that content. That is well worth the investment for us. And I think also what we were finding is it wasn't just people who needed audio description, who required that service. It was a lot of other people who felt like it was an interesting way into the content to have somebody describe it to them. So I think making those choices also increases the accessibility of putting something out into the universe.
Thank you. So just got a question from Jane at Spike Island, and it's a question for all. And Anku, I think you've kind of posted a bit of a response in the chat, so I may come to you first. But the question is, how do you strike the best balance between content dissemination and audience data capture, i.e. streaming an event to YouTube and Facebook to reach a broader audience, brackets, people can inevitably tune in without booking or sharing their details? Anku?
Yeah, I think I'm parroting Chloe's point. I think you think about it in terms of an audience journey, right? And if you go, this is the customer acquisition moment. So I go out, I share a piece of content with you. It's free. It's very low risk for you. You don't have to share anything. But all of a sudden, that's your entry point into dance or into Sadler's Wells or into the brand. And then if that content is quality, if it engages you, if it builds a community for you, then you're likely to do all the other things I want you to do. So maybe treat that initial bit of content like you would have as your poster in the center of town. And you treat it as a different, you treat it differently. But I don't think every piece of content at every touch point has to do all of the things, much like Chloe was saying.
Liam, any thoughts?
I would completely concur. And the only thing I would add, and this is obviously from a bit of a kind of commercial e-commerce head, but I would just think about, you know, what's the next best action? So what are you asking people to do after they've consumed that content? So if it's not on one of your owned channels, then actually, you know, you may want to think about how you drive that traffic or that audience back to you through suggesting their next best action. So that'd be the only thing that I would say I think you could think about. So for example, if you were streaming, you know, if you were with Tate and you were streaming via Facebook and you were thinking about or you were streaming an exhibition, then actually could we drive you back with a discount to buy some exhibition merchandise from the shop, for example.
Yeah. And Chloe, you've commented on it already, but anything further to add?
No, I would agree with what everybody else has said. It's about warming people up. Nobody's going to give you all of their money the first time you meet them. So it's about starting off gently and getting people to really fall in love with your organization, and then you can go from there, and the sky's the limit.
Okay, great. So Chloe, I'm going to come back to you because we've had a question from Colette Bailey at Metal. Regarding online donation, how do you collect them online in a way that instills confidence in the giver? And do you consider how you might illustrate the impact that those donations make?
I mean, I think it all comes back to some of the conversations that we've already been having. The main way you're going to build up trust with people is if you build a relationship with them. So it's about how you get them to engage with your organization on a very tactical level. If you're using a digital giving platform, then make sure that it's one that is regulated by the fundraising regulator, because on a very basic level, if people see that, they know that your organization is trustworthy and that the money is going to you. But in terms of that journey, it's about keeping people engaged and keeping people warm. We've found it much easier to go out to fundraising asks to our mailing list. I'm not sure that's a surprise to anyone, because these are people that already know us and are already interested in our mission. And in terms of then the content that we do to support that, absolutely, I think the more you can show where people's money is going, it's really important. Anku touched on this a little bit. I think that it's always a balance between restricted giving, where you're asking for funding for a particular project, and unrestricted giving, and all of the fundraisers in our organization desperately want unrestricted giving. It's a harder sell because it's harder to show directly the benefits of that money. But the way that we try and do that is through telling stories and having that ongoing relationship with the people that end up donating to us. But we don't, and I suppose the only other thing I would say, which again echoes the previous conversations, is to try and think about how you might add a donation on to that journey. So it might not be the first interaction that you have with somebody, but at what point could you try to ask for a donation? And it's about testing and learning from that as well. So, you know, at what point in your email journey, so if you've got somebody to sign up to a newsletter, maybe it's the third or the fourth newsletter that you hit them with a donation ask, and before that you've spent some time telling them about why your organization is so fantastic and what that money would go and do.
Thank you, Chloe. So I'm going to try and squeeze one last question in. And it's going to go to everyone. So if we can get a quick answer, I'd be enormously appreciative. And it's from Marta Maria at ICOM. Do these revenue models help organizations in the short term, or are they here for the long term? So Liam, why don't we come to you first?
So I'll be pretty quick. I think the majority will be here for the long term, but my only two additions to that are they have to continue to talk to the mission of your organization, and they have to drive audience experience. Because if you marry those two and give your visitors, your customers, the most incredible experience, then you will be able to generate that revenue that you're looking for to support your overall mission. So yes, from me.
Thank you, Liam. Anku?
I think it depends on what your objectives are again, right? If you want to make tons of money and you want to build a catalog like Netflix, it's a long-term play. However, for us, for example, there is a short-term play, which is 52% of our Instagram audience is now international, when it used to be 45. 65% of our web visitors during the pandemic have been international, when they were 13%, right? And I think when you bring that out, you go, all of a sudden we have an international brand presence that we've been able to achieve through our digital content now. Now, if that was our objective, then yes, there are short-term things, there are short-term wins. And I think it's being really clear about what you're trying to do and on what time horizon. And there are definitely things that you can achieve in the short term through monetizing or distributing content that can be wins as you build to something more long-term.
Thank you, Anku. And Chloe, final thought.
I mean, I think it's just echoing what everybody else has said. I mean, I hope that the way of thinking goes on for the long term. I think we're starting to think much more strategically about how we can include digital in our mix and have that sort of omni-channel offer that Liam was talking about. So I hope that the way of thinking continues, although I think some of the consequences of what's come out of the last 6 months will inevitably be short term, because there is nothing that compares to the experience of being in our organizations and having that face-to-face brilliant live or right in front of your face experience. But I hope that some of what we've learned in the last 6 months really continues on.
Brilliant. Thank you. And thank you, panelists. And for me, that's been an amazing conversation, and lots of things really stick out for me. Firstly, it's the opportunities for smaller organizations around e-commerce, existing opportunities such as the ticketed user journey and getting information from audiences. I think that what Anku said about digital sales not replacing box office, but there are other KPIs and wider goals, and being clear on what those are, are critical. But then plus, from everyone, that message that really understanding your audiences is at the core of this, understanding what they expect from you, how they interact with you, but both digitally and in the physical world. So thank you so much for your insights. So let me quickly now turn to Moira from Google Arts and Culture, who'll talk about very briefly the Connected to Culture playbook, which also picks up on some of the themes that we've spoken about today.
Hi everyone, thank you, Owen. Thanks so much as well to the panel. I think Liam, Anku and Chloe just done such an amazing job. It's so interesting to hear your insights, and particularly the importance of the user journey experience, I think, online, because it's something I think a lot of people are kind of adapting to now. So if you want to learn a little bit more about making the most of digital tools and implement some of the things that were discussed here today, Google Arts and Culture have created a toolkit called Connected to Culture, which is linked here. And in this toolkit, you can find a range of things, so including things on reaching audiences and how to apply for ad grants, reimagining live events, making the most of your digital archive, launching new revenue streams, creating content remotely, and of course, some inspiration to hopefully inspire you for any work that you do further down the line. So there's really great creative work from around the world that you can see. So do have a look, and if you have any questions, get in touch directly, and we hope that you find it helpful.
Thank you, Moira. So we are now completely out of time. So let me say again to the panelists, thank you so much for your time. It's been a fantastic discussion, tons of fascinating and important insights, and I sincerely hope that everyone's enjoyed it as much as I have. And I also want to say a big thank you to the team at the Arts Council, so Rose and Tina and Carl Stevens. You know, the series that we've had have gone seamlessly, and that doesn't happen without a lot of work. So thank you so much for all the effort that you put in. And similarly with the team at Google Arts and Culture, you know, it continues to be an amazing partnership, and this is just another example of that. So Moira, thank you too. And so finally, thanks to everyone who joined us today and who's joined us over the series. Fingers crossed we'll see you again in the new year, but until then, and I hope it's not too early to say it, you know, have a great Christmas. And enjoy the next few weeks, and we will hopefully see you on one of these sessions sometime very, very soon.